Okay, we're going to start talking about the origins of World War II, and this is chapter 10. So we see pictures here of some of the World War II leaders. Some of them you might recognize. Probably recognize Hitler here. You might recognize Joseph Stalin here. This is the American president, Franklin Roosevelt. And we have the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. We have the Italian leader, Benito Mussolini, and the Japanese leader, Hideki Tojo. And then here we see kind of the destruction that happens during World War II. We see, you see like artillery here. You see the buildings all crumbled around it. A lot of destruction in World War II. So we're going to get to how we get to the beginning of World War II. Here are some terms and people that you should know. You should know what fascism is. This is this form of government that was used by Germany and Italy during World War II. It really emphasizes this idea of nationalism in the country over kind of individualism. It's not like communism. They actually were very strongly anti-communist. They believed that individuals, their primary purpose should be their allegiance to the country. Next, we have a German word, Anschluss, which is a word that means reunification. And Hitler wanted to unify all the German speaking people in Europe. And so this was when Germany and Austria were unified. We have this term appeasement, which you might have come across in a previous history class. This is where Britain and France agree to what Hitler wanted for land in order to avoid future war. And this is very strongly criticized and was a huge mistake. Next, we have Blitzkrieg. So if you've ever heard the word blitz, it's short for blitzkrieg. This is a German military strategy. It uses tanks and planes to quickly come into a place and strike fast, strike hard, and conquer, rather than going slowly and being more defensive. Okay, a puppet government. So you think about a puppet. A puppet has a puppeteer who controls it. It's the same idea, but with government, right? So a government that is supposedly independent. They're independent in name, but they're actually being told what to do by another country, another outside power. And then last, we have another German word here, the Luftwaffe. This is the German Air Force during World War II. Okay, so let's talk about the dictators that came up and the rise of dictators in World War II. We're going to start with Mussolini in Italy. He was a fascist, and as a fascist, he was strongly anti-communist. He used this fear of communism to tell people that communists are threatening Italy, and he had these people called black shirts. They wore black shirts, and they were kind of like civilians that were armed and stuff, and they'd go around on the streets and they'd intimidate other Italians that disagreed, and they would beat people up. They would do all kinds of things. They would use intimidation and violence here. And Mussolini was able to get a lot of influence that way. And the middle class in particular liked what he was saying because they thought he was going to protect their property. And he ended up being appointed as leader by the king of Italy, and he became known as Il Duce, which means the leader. Okay. In the Soviet Union, we have Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin, he took over after Lenin's death. Lenin, you might remember, as the leader of the Russian Revolution. And Stalin was known for targeting his political enemies, both religious and ethnic minorities, especially Jews, as well as anybody else that opposed his power. And he ended up, in the time that he was leader of the Soviet Union, killing 15 to 20 million people. So you see in this cartoon here, you see this pile of skulls, right? And this is Joseph Stalin. The mustache is the big clue here. Whenever you see that, it's probably Joseph Stalin. And you see these piles of skulls representing his, killing his enemies. He also was trying to industrialize the Soviet Union. He had these 5-year plans to kind of bring about industrialization to the Soviet Union, and he kind of was willing to do this at any cost. So here we have some ideas of fascism. They're anti-democratic, they are totalitarian. That means they need one strong leader. We see that with Mussolini. Extreme nationalism and militarism. They want to use the military to show the power of the nation, and they're strongly anti-communist. So Mussolini is a fascist, Stalin is a communist. So they're on opposite sides here. Our next dictator is Hitler, probably one of the most famous dictators of all time. He, like Mussolini, blamed Jews and communists for Germany's economic problems after World War I. Because remember, the Treaty of Versailles treated Germany very harshly, and their economy was in really bad shape after World War I. He was the leader of the Nazi Party. And we see over here, this is the German kind of parliament building called the Reichstag. And there was a fire in this building that was blamed on Jews and communists, and in the elections that followed, allowed Nazis to kind of gain power here, even though there's evidence to suggest that um, the Nazis themselves were the ones that started the fire, and it certainly wasn't Jews or communists. So after after the Nazis kind of were able to get the largest amount of votes in the Reichstag, the German parliament, Hitler was appointed chancellor by the German president. So came to his power legally. He didn't seize power or anything like that. And then they had further elections and used intimidation just like Mussolini did. And then he became president. So again, Hitler became president through legal means. He did not he did not do it through the military or anything like that. And he became known as Der Führer, or the leader, very similar to Mussolini here, right? Il Duce and Der Führer. Okay. All right. Finally, we have Japan. And this one's a little bit different than the others. It's kind of a military dictatorship. It's more like a group of people rather than just a single person. Plus, Japan has an emperor through this period as well, although the emperor has very little actual power. So Japan blamed corrupt politicians for Japan's economic problems during the Great Depression. So we know there's a common theme here that, Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, and the Japanese military are all blaming somebody else for the problems in that country, and that's what they use to gain power. The military leaders convinced the emperor that they should invade Manchuria. So we see Japan at the time had control of Korea. They invaded this area of China called Manchuria. There's a lot of resources here because Japan, as an island, had to import many of its resources. So they saw this expansion as a way to increase their economic power. The military refused to kind of stop doing this, even though lots of international groups criticized Japan for it. And the Hideki Tojo, who kind of was the minister of defense or of war, he ended up becoming prime minister and leader of Japan. All right, so those are our kind of four kind of dictators or totalitarian governments in Italy, in the Soviet Union, Japan, and Germany. All right, so now let's get to how World War II begins. So this goes all the way back to March of 1935 when Hitler begins to militarize Germany. And the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed after World War I, was designed to punish Germany in a lot of different ways. One of the ways they did that was they said that Germany was not allowed to build up its military at all. And Hitler saw that as being a weakness for Germany. So Hitler started making speeches and going around and talking about how he wanted to unite all German-speaking people and rebuild Germany and make it strong again. So once he kind of got into power, he began to build up the Army and Air Force in direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. So everybody knew that Germany was not allowed to build up an army, and everybody saw Germany building up its army. So they knew that Hitler was violating this treaty and going against it, and was potentially going to be very aggressive. So 3 years later, in March of 1938, we have the Anschluss, right? Hitler threatened Austria with invasion. Remember, Austria speaks German, and then Germany also speaks German, so Hitler wanted to unite German-speaking people. So he threatened Austria with an invasion. They're right next door. And Austria was going to vote about whether they should join up with Germany, but before they could vote, they were invaded before the election happened. So Hitler was able to control Austria through invasion because Hitler felt like he was going to lose that election, so he invaded anyway. We also have the Munich Conference here, September of 1938. This is the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain holding this piece of paper. That's this agreement with Hitler. And at the time, before the conference, Hitler had threatened to take over Czechoslovakia and a particular area called the Sudetenland. And Britain and France saw this as, they were troubled by this because Hitler was expanding. He'd already added Austria. Now he was trying to add another place to it. And so Britain and France did not want to repeat World War I, so they negotiated with Hitler. And they basically allowed Hitler to take part of Czechoslovakia in exchange for saying he was all done. That's all he was going to get. He was not going to try and get any more land. And this is called appeasement. Appeasement is when you give somebody what they want in the hopes that they don't keep going, that it'll be enough for them. And so Neville Chamberlain came back with his paper saying he has peace in our time. But what happened is Hitler ignored the agreement and ended up taking over all of Czechoslovakia. Okay. So in August of 1939, we have Stalin and Hitler. They're kind of not neighbors exactly, but Hitler was concerned that if he were to continue expanding east, that the Soviet Union would get nervous and they might be in war with the Soviet Union. And with people on his west side too. So he didn't want to do that. So he wanted to avoid war on that eastern side. Stalin also didn't want to go to war necessarily, but he also saw an opportunity here because he thought if Germany went to war against, say, Britain and France, that might be good for the Soviet Union. So they assigned this non-aggression pact. We see here the Soviet symbol. We see here the Nazi German symbol, right? This idea that August 23rd, 1939, this is the non-aggression pact, and they both promised to not attack each other. Of course, both Stalin and Hitler would break this promise later on. All right, so September of 1939, this is kind of the official start of World War II, where Hitler and Germany invaded Poland, and they used this what's called a blitzkrieg strategy, where they used fast tanks and aircraft with paratroopers, and they would take over Poland very quickly, right? This was this kind of fast and hard strategy that Germany was trying to use to take over Europe quickly. That was the plan. And after this, Britain and France declared war on Germany. We had a small period where everybody was waiting to see what was going to happen next. And then we kind of have the battles kind of beginning here. So one of the notable kind of things that happens is in June of 1940, there's this what's called the miracle at Dunkirk. Basically, the British troops were along the coast in France, and they were trapped right up against the coast, and they didn't have anywhere to go. Germans were kind of cornering them, and they needed rescue. And so the British leader, Winston Churchill, encouraged people to use whatever boats they could to sail across the English Channel, which is fairly short, and pick up British soldiers. There's a movie about this that came out a few years ago. And about 338,000 troops were rescued. So you had people in regular sailboats, in yachts, in whatever boats people had access to. They were rescuing soldiers on the beach in Dunkirk. So again, this is Hitler is moving very quickly. He's taking control of Europe. In fact, in that same month, France falls to Germany completely. I see this picture of Hitler in Paris with the Eiffel Tower here. So France surrendered in June of 1940, and Germany set up this puppet government. So it's called the Vichy government, and the Vichy government was supposed to be independent, but Germany was really the one telling them what to do. And there was a man named Charles de Gaulle, who was a French military general. He went into exile into Britain. That means he had to leave France, and he kind of led this French government in exile that resisted German occupation. But the puppet government was kind of the ones in control and doing what Germany told them to do. And then in August of 1940, we have the Battle of Britain. So this is really important because this is kind of Hitler's first defeat, I guess. Up to this point, Hitler had been successful going into Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, France. He was kind of steamrolling through all of Europe. And so his next plan was to invade Britain and to take over Britain. So the German Air Force started to bomb London. They bombed London for several months. This is called the Blitz. And the people of London, they would hide in the subway tunnels to avoid the bombings. They happened every single night. They would black out their windows, all that kind of stuff. Britain, however, was able to defend itself. They had a new technology called radar, which allowed them to locate the German planes as they were flying in, even at night, and they were able to shoot down many German planes. And so this was actually a pretty successful strategy. There was a lot of cost to it, for sure, but it was also costly to the Germans, and Hitler ended up canceling his plans to invade Britain. So this is kind of Britain's first defeat, or Hitler's first defeat of World War II, and we're still not quite yet where the United States is going to get involved. They won't get involved for another year plus. So right now it's Britain kind of by itself at the end here, with fighting against Hitler in Europe.